February is done and over with. It is now March, which means we're talking about all the books and manga that I read. As far as the genres, I read a good wide range. Less fantasy than normal. Not used to that. And there were a couple of books that were excellent and a couple that were super not. So we have a decent amount to talk about. And my neighbor, who's cleaning out his garage while I film this, will judge me. First book I finished this month is The Traitor's Blade. This is the first book in I think it's a quartet. I don't know because I won't finish it. So I started this book in January and then finished it in February, the beginning of February. So this follows Felicio, who is he was a gray coat. So in this world there was a king, and he was a good king. He was a great king. He was a noble king, a just king, and then he died. He was killed. He had his band of merry men that he accumulated, that he got together, and he called them his gray coats. They were his inner circle, the ones that that followed his, or rather that served the king's law. The king was killed and his group of merry men were shamed and are no longer considered anything worth having. In fact, they're kind of despised in this world, and the world has descended into disorder. It's not so good. I didn't like this one. It was fine. For the majority of the book, it was fine. It was one of those books where I totally understand why so many people like it. It makes complete sense to me, but I just know that it's not my thing, which is why I'm not continuing on with the series, because at this point, I know my taste well enough to know that this style of book, this very quick, fast, action-packed, really just focused on a tightly paced, exciting, fun, banter-heavy, I love good banter, but story that's more about having a great time. It's not me, which makes me sound very boring, but I like boring books. I like books that are slower and that take their time to really dig into the emotions of things, and this isn't it. I will say that the banter in this, excellent. The camaraderie between the gray coats that we do follow, I mean, we mostly follow our main character. He's solo for a lot of the book, but when they get together, I love their interactions. That was the best part of the book. And it definitely does try to dig into some of the more heinous things that happen. I just don't think that it succeeded in going very deep. I also think that the author just didn't think through a lot of things, if I'm honest. If you've heard of this book, then you've probably already heard some commentary on it, because there's one scene especially that's particularly egregious that would be a spoiler for me to talk about, but is very non-consensual and yet painted as a narrative net positive. Not good times. Not good times. But there were several scenes that are just, it would happen, and I just would feel like the author just didn't really think through. He was writing a cool scene or an intense scene, but didn't really think through the implications of it, which really drew me out. Also, the ending relied so heavily on conveniences, with the sole explanation of one character saying, "Don't worry, everything's planned, everything's thought through." You just don't see the tapestry. You don't see the things that are being woven together, or some nonsense like that, which means that all the conveniences in book one are probably going to be explained later in the series, but I'll never know it. I get why people love this book. It was a big miss for me. Next up is The Deep. It was a novella, and I listened to it on audiobook. This follows, it's I can't remember now. I looked up the genre that it's published under. I think it's published under fantasy, but maybe it's published under sci-fi. I would call it alternate history. This follows the transatlantic slave trade, and specifically the slaves that were sick or pregnant and that got thrown overboard because they were deemed an inconvenience. And this is kind of an alternate history, sci-fi fantasy, where the people who were thrown overboard got to live a new life in the deep. So they're turned into these mermaid-esque characters that live in the deep and have community there. And there's one person, our main character, who holds the history within her. She holds the histories of their past, what got them here, and what made them who they are. And she contains it all within her. And then there is it's very Giver-esque, if you've read the classic The Giver. There is a time every so often where she actually gives them their memories and they remember, but for the most part she holds it all on her own, and the memories are just, the history is too heavy for her to carry alone, so she ends up leaving. This is really really about the importance of history and the importance of remembering, but also the importance of community and not having to hold all of that on your own and sharing it with the people around you and coming together and being there for one another and the community that you can create, and the importance of not forgetting, as well as learning how to move forward while still carrying that within yourself. Like I said, it was a novella. I don't read a lot of novellas, so this may be a me problem, but my one thing with this is I just wish that we had more, which is like so counterintuitive to talking about a novella, but I wanted the characters to go deeper. I wanted to explore some of these themes a little bit further, and I think that that's probably more of a me thing because I'm not used to reading novellas. I'm far more used to reading novels, but I wish there was more. I also read volumes 7 through 11 of Yona and the Dawn. This is a story, it's another historical fantasy following a princess whose father was assassinated. There was a coup and she ran away with her guard, and now she's trying to understand the kingdom better. She's growing as a person. She's trying to gain strength to challenge what's happened and to get her kingdom back, to be able to serve her kingdom again. The volumes that I read this month were great. There were, I think, 2 probably that I didn't like, but for the most part, I enjoyed everything that I read. I'm really enjoying it. It's not the type of story that I typically read, and it has a lot of elements that I don't like. It started off pretty shallow, in my opinion, but I feel like I'm getting to know these characters more. I'm really seeing them progress. We're widening the scope, sometimes a little bit too wide, but I'm enjoying myself. Next up is The Trouble with Peace. This is the sequel to A Little Hatred. This is book 2 in the Age of Madness trilogy, written by Joe Abercrombie, one of my favorite authors. I do have a review up already for books 1 and book 2. They're both on the second channel, which, if you don't know, I have a second channel where I do weekly reading vlogs, keeping you up to date on what I'm reading week to week, as well as dedicated reviews for my favorite things that I read. The Trouble with Peace was so good. It was such a good follow-up. I never know in what direction Joe's plots are going to go in. I never know in what direction the characters are going to go in, even though he writes these characters so well, so I know them. I understand what makes them tick. I understand why they make the decisions that they make, but I still can't predict it because humans are unpredictable, and his stories are so that way, where it's just everything feels like, yeah, this is what a real life person would do, not what plot needs them to do. But at the same time, I don't know. Like, I'm constantly surprised by the twists and turns that it takes, and I'm constantly on the edge of my seat and also saddened by how mean Joe is to his characters. I'm having a great time. I'm having the best time. I love these books. Next up is Serial Cortex. This was a sci-fi slash mystery. Anyway, this follows a scientist who, she's doing this research for mind hopping, does she call it? Imagination hopping? What was it called? That doesn't remind me on the back. I'm pretty sure she called it mind hopping, where she could actually jump into the consciousness of another person's mind. She can go into, they can hook up to this machine, she can and the other person can, and then she can go into their mind and work through some things with them. Ideally, what she's working through with them are things like their fears or their trauma that she's trying to help them get free of or work past or get to the next step. But instead, her research is very underfunded. She really just, it's not looking good for her. It's looking like everything is basically going to be all for naught. And then this detective group comes to her and says, we need to break the rules because we're pretty sure that we found out who the serial killer is. There's a serial killer, but we don't have enough proof on her, so we need you to go inside her brain and prove that she did it. So there's a little bit of suspension of disbelief that has to happen here. It's definitely a matter of people who are in very desperate situations, and so they go against their moral compass as well as go against code of how things are supposed to happen in order to make this plot feasible. But it was a really fun time. The characters were interesting. I've never seen this concept done before, though when I talked about it in a reading vlog, there were several people that said that they had seen this done before, like in movies, which I'm not a big movie watcher, so that's probably why. But this was fresh to me, and it was fun. It was also fun because the mystery side of it, which I typically don't jive with mysteries as much, the mystery side of it was definitely, it didn't take over the story. It was more of, okay, we're doing this thing and it's pretty interesting, and also, wait a second, did she do it? And if not her, then who? And it was kind of fun to just, you know, question everybody and then narrow down the stuff and follow the clues. You'll definitely figure it out before the main character does, but yeah, I had fun. Next up is Vagabond. I read volumes 4 through 9 this month. The next two, Vizbigs. So Musashi is our main character. He is a prodigy in killing. He's a super good killer. And this is his story of trying to prove himself as a samurai, prove himself as a fighter by finding opponents that are stronger than him and proving that he's the strongest in the land. But it's also very much a spiritual journey as well as a personal journey of him learning the craft of fighting, but also learning how to be a man and not a beast. I feel like I'm really getting into the nitty-gritty of what this story is. In these last volumes that I've read, I feel like I'm starting to understand what the author is trying to say, or at least the questions that he's trying to ask and wants me to think about. And it's definitely more of a slow, internal, philosophical story more than it is about the fights, although there are plenty of those. So it's very action-packed and exciting and fun, but it's also really introspective, and I'm really enjoying the discussions that I'm having with my friend Philip Chase over on my second channel, where we're digging into it and really asking those questions and trying to have those discussions that it seems like the author wants us to have. The Loving Spirit. Oh man, what do we do with this one? This is by one of my favorite authors of all time, Daphne du Maurier. This is her debut novel, and oh boy. Oh boy. Some things that I love about it. I love to see du Maurier so early in her craft doing all the things that she does, her immersive writing, her incredible storytelling, her ability to write very unlikable characters that you just need to know more about. But in this unhoned sort of way, it was very interesting for me. But with incest. I can't say that I liked the story itself. This follows 4 generations of a family, starting with Janet, working her way down from Janet to her son to his daughter. 4 generations, the family drama that's within it, and the individual struggles. You have Janet, who is a woman who craves adventure, but because of the time that she's born in, that's not really an option for her. And then each of their own individual, what they desire for their life and what they do with their lives, as well as a thread of conflict that kind of follows all throughout, as well as Janet, whose loving spirit also follows them and guides them. I talked about this, I really dug into this and why I'm glad I read this, and why I'm grateful that I read it but don't recommend it to you. I talked about that in my reading vlog if you want to kind of dig into that. I'm glad I read it, but I don't recommend it to you. And the final book that I read this month was Never Caught. This is the story of Yona Judge. She was one of the Washington's slaves, and this is her story with the Washingtons, as well as her story of escaping and pursuing her freedom and the Washingtons' pursuit to get back their property. So we learn a lot about the Washington's estate and about his policies and his experience as, well, we learn a little bit about his experience as a president. But it's obviously more focused on Yona, but with there not being a lot of historical documentation on her, we do have to pull from other historical documents, which means that we get, you know, a lot of context around the time and the setting as well, which was really fascinating. And Yona's story as well is fascinating. We do have some interviews from Yona when she was older that she did do, so we do have some information directly from her mouth on this, as well as other documents that the author pulled from, and it was fascinating. My big complaint with this was the amount of speculation that happened in the story. Unnecessary speculation. Some speculation, totally understandable, but there was a lot of unnecessary speculation that happened, which I dig into and give examples of in the vlog again, so if you're interested, you can check that out. But it was just, it grated on me, but it was still a fascinating story to learn about, and I definitely recommend it. So these are the books that I read this month, as well as some that are not shown here because I didn't have them all physically. Feel free to chat with me more about any of these if you're interested. My favorite and least favorite books of the month I'll put on the screen. Y'all said you like that better at the end of the video, so there you go. But chat with me more about any of these in the comments if you like. I post videos every Monday and Friday on this channel, Tuesdays and Thursdays on the second channel. I'll see you again soon. Bye.